But welcome to this 6-hour diagnostic on adolescent anxiety and depression. Got a couple goals today. We want to, these are objectives: conceptualize and assess problematic adolescent behaviors and mental health concerns using DNAV. We're going to review a bunch, not all of the anxiety and depression criteria, but we've literally put all the anxiety and depression criteria into that packet for you. And Melissa and Katie will talk about updates and how you can tell what's different when we get to that. We're hoping you leave understanding the core principles of using motivational interviewing with adolescents, and it works actually with other people also. Learn specific strategies, skills, and practical tools to utilize in therapy with adolescents for sure, because we've been using these. All right, Katie and I are both from the Anxiety Center at Renewed Counseling Center. I'm the Director of Adolescent Services. Just going to walk you through a little bit of our stories, or a little bit about ourselves, so you know what you're getting into. Turns out at 3, and luckily most of this is pre-memory, I ran from one end of my house and would run into a wall, and then I would turn around and run to the other end of my house and run into a wall, and I just did it. And my parents were like, doesn't seem like a really good idea. So they took me to the doctor, and anybody guess what the doctor said? He's got ADHD. Put me on Ritalin for a little while. And it's really ADHD when Ritalin works. And my mom's like, well, yeah, he's very compliant. He's very docile right now, but he's not my energetic, creative young man. So what else can we do here? And the doctor, this is 1973, 74. And he's like, he's going to have to be able to sit on a piano bench for 15 minutes just to get through school. He's going to have to be able to sit there doing, not doing anything. Apparently, the next year, my parents' life was miserable. All right, they literally had to hold me to get the first couple minutes to get me to calm down. And they worked their way up. But it really allowed me to access all my gifts and talents when I got to school. And I share that both because I think my parents are wonderful, but I really believe in skills and strategies. Those are skills and strategies to overcome ADHD instead of just medication or other things. And I say that because our whole program, our IOP for adolescents is skills-based. We don't do a ton of processing. Some of it comes up, but it is skills-based. So when we're talking through things, we're going to be talking to you about skills that we have seen work. You move that forward. I did a lot of youth ministry in my early young adult ages, and spent 10,000 hours or so with adolescents in a bus or in a room or on a mission trip. And it really it gives them different insight as to just their normal behaviors. And I think that flows into everything we do. Like, we had to influence young people. And you will find out as we talk about it, and motivational interviewing is kind of the next step of this, is how do we drive willingness? How do we get a young person willing to look at change? And so almost everything we do tries to put a piece of that into play. Life led me to Washington, D.C. I've done some work with the federal government in child welfare, came back here, had worked my way up or down into an executive at a nonprofit. But over the years before that, I'd met my wife, Corey, who's in the back or somewhere around here with our adopted daughter, which is part of my story also. We've adopted 2 from the child welfare system. So some of my examples come from dealing with 24/7 survival and trauma mind kind of thing. But came back here. She had started 6 or 8 years ago. I'm not tracking time really well, but an IOP, an intensive outpatient program for adults struggling with anxiety. She'd go speak about it everywhere, and they'd be like, well, what are you guys doing for adolescents? It's not her area of expertise or what she really wants to spend her time on. So she's like, we're focused on adults. But I heard all this. And again, I'd worked my way into a nonprofit, and it turns out when nonprofits don't make a profit, they got to do something. So my department got cut, and it was like I'm feeling called or led back into working directly with adolescents and their families. And so 5 years ago, we started up the Adolescent IOP for anxiety and depression. And we are in our 5th year. Our 4th anniversary was September 10th. And we've seen about 450 plus young people go through our program. So when we share examples and stuff like that, it is all say, Katie's been there from day one. So when we share those examples, it's because we have seen a full spectrum of all these issues and have found these things to be helpful and working. I'm going to pass that over to Katie to introduce herself.
I don't have a boisterous voice like Jason, so I will be trying to use the mic here.
Yes, there you go.
All right. Hey, I'm Katie. Good morning. Welcome or thank you for being here with us. We're pretty excited about all of this. Just a little bit of background on me. I am an Iowa native, born and raised. I always like to put that in there because I'm an Iowa State fan. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, because I love the work we do. My husband's job brought us down here to Kansas City 5 years ago. And I found Renew, just happened to connect with Corey, and I've been there ever since, having done my internship there, and have continued on as just recently this year, the Associate Director of Adolescent Services, which has been fun. But my primary role has also been intake, which is all of the diagnosis piece that we do for our adolescents. And that over the last 4 years, it's always interesting to see what comes through the door in our office, because I think you can get the individuals who don't want to talk at all, and then you get the ones who run out of your office, and sometimes you're like, do I need to call the police for you? So it's been exciting, and I'm really excited to be able to share what I have worked on over the last 2 years, especially with motivational interviewing this year.
Great. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, keep that near you. Can you guys hear me just fine? Yeah, one of my father's blessings is a loud, booming voice. This is what we do. Katie actually does do our intake, so if you need to connect and have some questions, dealing with school avoidance, suicidal ideation, panic disorder, depression, self-harm, and we see a lot of identity issues, just that questioning phase, and then even leading into that existential questions about what's the purpose of life. And so that's what we do, kind of trying to put a lot of skills into 5 weeks and attempting very significantly to interact with other clinicians around that young person and be like a team around them. It's a little bit different list, but we also have an adult program, and you've got a couple of our leads, Anna and my wife, Kate, Corey back here. And so and Ari is the intake. So we're kind of like a little family at Renew. All right. I think the overriding concept with adolescents, or as far as I'm concerned, yes.
Your age for adolescents.
So we are now serving 12 to 18.
12 days.
Yeah, and 12-year-olds are hard, just to be honest, and but we had, I mean, literally we get so many calls from them, and for quite a while, we started at 12 and then found what we were doing wasn't overly effective with them. Then we got better, and we got so many calls on 12-year-olds, and I'm really clear when we're working with the family of 12-year-olds that the parents have to be even more invested than the older adolescents, because they have to, there has to be some repetition and some it's not just getting a skill into a 12-year-old's head. It's a little bit of a different story, but 12 to 18 is what you see, what you really get. And I really like how this kind of concept fits right in. Well, this is kind of how I think about adolescence, I think. So I'm getting circumcised tomorrow. My friend told me they'd had it done when he was a few days old. I asked him, does it hurt? I said, well, I couldn't walk for about a year. That to me is adolescent logic at its best, right there, and this image is just like, somebody waves at them the day before and they're on top of the world, and then they don't get a text that they were expecting, and oh my goodness, like that, just those highs and lows that you see in young people. And the interesting thing is that fits right in with DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy, which is one of the models we use, in that, dialectics is that two completely opposite things can be true at the same time, which we see in young people all the time, and that going to the extreme on even good concepts, much less tougher ones, is not always a good idea. And I'm going to talk through some of those. And so the goal of DBT is to help young people and their families kind of walk the middle path. some of the things we see in our program and working with young people that are dialectics are that a young person is very, very narcissistic. All right. They are thinking about themselves all the time. And again, here's where the logic plays in, because they also think that every other person they hang out with is thinking about them as much as they are thinking about them. They don't add up how that's impossible by, through physics, but they're thinking about themselves. And so you got to be careful about how much you lean into that. But they also have a passion for the tribe, whatever tribe they've picked. And now we've got young people, and I'm sure you guys have seen it. They're going and picking their own diagnosis. They're going and researching stuff. They're giving themselves labels. And then they buy in. And so that's their tribe. And so when you're working with a young person, you got to be really careful walking that middle path and what you say and what you talk about. If they think they're in a tribe, you can destroy your relationship by an offhand comment about that tribe. All right. And not paying enough attention to them also can destroy it. All right. They're also tough on the outside and fragile on the inside. I'm sure most of you know that, but we can have a young person come to intake, and I've seen this. I've done enough intakes. The young person can sit and look me in the eye and tell me all the things they're struggling with and how it is interfering with their life. And they would actually like some help from it. All right, good. Come in, join our program. We set them in the circle on a Monday, and we're like, so why are you here? And they're like, I don't know, parents made me, right? That is, growing into independence, that developmental task that they need to go through somehow requires some toughness. They got to build up some toughness. On the other hand, they are very, very fragile on the inside. And so I spend a lot of my interactions with young people in an as if they want meaningful connections, as if they actually would like to feel some hope in their lives, those kind of, because they're not going to give you kudos real quickly for as ifs. They got to believe you're authentic, you're real, those kind of things. And so you kind of got to earn that right. Structure and control versus relationship. As a program, personally, I don't think people change outside of relationships. All right, so relationships, so we keep at least 2 people in the room at all times, that they can feel a connection to one of our clinicians, one of our support staff, because we see change when a young person connects with somebody. Like everybody else becomes a little bit more okay. All right. If nobody connects with them, and we've had kids that are really tough, we don't see change. All right. But on the other hand, if you go too deep into relationship, if it's all about relationship, they kind of start ruling the roost, and they take control of things. They're more focused on the relationship with their peers, and they're trying to get their validation from their peers instead of looking for things that would change. And so the dialectic for relationship is how much structure and control do we need to put in there? We have a curriculum. In our program, we do see times where that gets a little bit out of whack, the relationship piece, and the young people come in and we'll have a seating chart. All right, so we're going to put some more structure and some control on this because we're trying to move everybody forward in a safe manner. And I think that's important even in an independent relationship, or an individual relationship, that the relationship is important, but it cannot be the end all, because they're there for a reason, and there needs to be something that helps them move forward. The existential stuff has led to this last one, control versus wonder and faith. And we see it when people start questioning the purpose of life, and we get a lot that are, near that, nihilism edge where nothing matters kind of thing. And they've lost all wonder and excitement about the world. They've lost all faith in institutions. They've lost all faith in their families or anything. And they tend to shift to control. So you see somebody trying to control their eating habits. They start trying to control how late they're up, or what they're doing. They just start taking more and more pieces of control. And so figuring out how to walk that middle path to help them find that. Our family, as she just walked out, we've made a decision to spend one of our family vacations going after some just incredible outdoor experience. So 2 years ago, we went to the Grand Canyon. Last summer, we went to Mount Rushmore. Next year, we're going to the Rocky Mountains. Try to just show the young people there is something bigger than them, because they lose and forget that. You can think about that. I'm going to keep us moving today. If you've got questions, and moving in from that, what is what is the goal of adolescence? And I think this is a pretty good list. They need to establish an identity. They need to establish independence and autonomy. They need to practice intimacy and closeness in relationships. They need to adjust to a developing and changing body. They need to adjust to brain development. Just read an article the other night that I just thinking about that adjusting to a developing and changing body. That COVID, they're linking COVID to young ladies, starting their menstrual cycle sooner. So moving it down, and that the screen time actually had an impact on that. And so we saw, move it from 13 to 12 to 11 kind of thing, even in that time period. And they're not even prepared to deal with those adjustments on a historic cycle or a historic phase. And so as it gets younger, they're less able to do this. So if this is what we think is the goal of adolescence, they're not easy, they're frequently messy, and they are in interaction with their parents. And so just want to set up all of the complicating factors here. So parents can go to the extreme on any of these other dialectic areas. They can make light of problem behavior. So they actually have a kid who's stolen 2 or 3 times, and they just make light of it and act like that's not a real issue, or they haven't gone to a specific class for a while kind of thing. Or they can make too much of typical behaviors. All right, my kid, has come in and they yelled at me and slammed the door, and we need to talk to you as a therapist and get them into a program. No, you don't. All right, it's just not there yet. Parents can hold on too tight. We've all heard about the helicopter kind of parenting. They can force independence too soon. Either one of these extremes, and that's where DBT and thinking about walking that middle path is really helpful. They can become too lenient, and they can become too strict. We used to have that discussion with young people, and it was always interesting because we do the discussion before their parents came in. Every young person would actually admit saying they want their parents to be somewhere in the middle there. None of them, you never got a kid just full out, I want to be able to do everything I want. They even know that's not really good for them. All right. So these are all those developmental tasks. As they do them, they interact with these areas of parenting. And really, so you end up with this environment where there could be multiple challenges, and it's hard to tell what is influencing the situation or the problem you're getting presented with, that kind of thing. Again, DBT, dialectical behavior, I would argue that this is the most important one, and especially the most important one in our room and with the parents I talk to, is acceptance and change. So this is one of those weird ones where acceptance sounds like a really good idea. Like I should just lean into that and go completely into acceptance. But in my own life, and especially since we're now in football season, if I could do acceptance to that extreme, I would be sitting on my couch, watching football and eating cereal. All right. And then just become happy with myself. Right. I'm okay. But guess what? I'm going to get even bigger than I am. I'm not going to provide for my family. I'm probably going to run out of that bringing me vitality and value in my life. And so that extreme is not really a good idea if you take it fully to the extreme. On the other end, the other extreme is change. All right. And so just imagine the young man who's pitched a one-hitter. And they're coming off pretty excited, right? They run into dad, and the first thing dad says is, man, if you just thrown a knuckleball, like somehow a one-hitter wasn't good enough, all right? And these young people are always thinking it's not good enough. And as soon as they have that thought, they think they need to be changing all the time. None of us can sustain change all the time, just constant, and feeling like there's constant expectations of change, all right? In parents, it becomes, who are they blaming for the situation that they're in right now? All right, are they blaming themselves, their own genetics, their parenting, the environment that they put around their young person? If their young person is struggling, are they blaming others? Are they spending their time thinking, well, their friends led them down this path, or social media is the horrible thing? And honestly, none of that really serves any purpose when we're trying to get to change or anywhere else. And so with both, our goal is, can you come to acceptance that this is who I am today, and this is how it is, and I would like tomorrow to be better. All right. And so if we can shift to that, we start putting some hope that I can have some control over tomorrow and change, but that I am okay in today. And we put more energy into self-compassion than I would have expected 5 or 6 years ago. And really helping these young people accept who they are and still find willingness to change. So again, I would argue that that's one of the, and DBT has quite a few dialectics that they go through, but I think this is the biggest one. I do think it's also important, these 3 states of mind, that we try to get young people. I think this is an amazing tool to be able to talk through and help a young person understand that all of these are okay, and in different situations, really what you want to do. So the 3 states are rational mind. All right, so decisions are based on what makes intellectual sense. Thinks logically, focuses on facts. So you guys might actually know who Spock is. Sherlock Holmes, Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory. That kind of mindset is when you default or you shift way over into that rational mindset. All right. It really suppresses or attempts to ignore or just act like emotions aren't there. All right. Some of that they play up and it seems like it's horrible, but I will tell you, this is my default. As I struggle more, I'm walking into something, I'm going to default to rational mind, which is amazingly helpful in a crisis situation. I can shut down my emotions. I can get people to safety. And then as I've gotten older, I can process those emotions later on. All right. So it's really helpful. It's also helpful as a clinician. I've yet to have a young person just a long time be able to shock me, like tell me something that is going to cause me to react in some way. So I can keep that in. On the other hand, when it's my default, when I'm struggling and stressed with my children and they are out of control or I'm getting overwhelmed and I default to this, then I'm going to be like, you're in timeout, you're in timeout, you're in timeout. So I move to that control side. I really just want to control everything so that it's rational and it makes sense and it's all in its place, which is really forgetting that I actually love these children, which is the emotional side. So you go to the opposite, the other dialectic, which is the emotional mind. Decisions are based on what feels good. And just think about our time in history. How do you make decisions? You go if you leave here and you go somewhere and you try and pick up a new bottle of shampoo. Anybody tried to do this lately? There's like 50 choices. How do you possibly make a rational decision on 50 choices of shampoo? I'm still using the shampoo my second mother told me to use when I was 20. Luckily, I can still get my hands on it. But like at that point, you're just doing what feels good. What did I see a commercial on? Whatever did I do? And so if you can't get good information, why not make decisions on what feels good? Thinks and focuses on emotions a lot, very reactive and or defensive. And we're going to talk about defense mechanisms. And so that's why defensive is there. And it says often, it is always opposed to rational mind. This is not, a young person that's in an emotional state is not waiting for you to tell them logically why their life is going to be just fine. They just don't care at that moment, right? On but the extremes of that is that they just get caught up in that. They get overly emotional. That leads to a lot of internal pain. But again, we all need emotional mind. We need emotional mind to fall in love with newborn babies, to become Twitter-pated. I would argue that probably the majority of historic, amazing art in the world is coming from people expressing their emotions and being in their emotional mind. So it's not like any of these are good or bad on their own. Our goal in our program and almost everything we do and set up is to help a young person both increase the window of tolerance on their wise mind, but also figure out how to shift themselves to that when they need to. All right. And so wise mind is, can we find a balance between the rational and the emotional? So we deal a lot with school avoidance, which means that homework stacks up. And so young people have big old honking piles of homework they haven't done. So they start realizing I should probably do this. And so emotionally, they have zero desire to do any of this homework. All right. On the other hand, they know they're going to fail these classes. Most of them are wanting, in our program, to go on to college and have a career. And so they're going through this whole process of, I'm going to destroy my life if I don't do this. So wise mind would be, or a wise mind answer for this situation might be, I'm going to pull out one single assignment. I'm going to put it down. I'm going to work for 15 or 20 minutes. And then I'm going to take a break, go do something I enjoy, and try to come back to this. And so that's a wise mind decision. The the neat thing about this is that you can immediately start talking about these in the past. What was an emotional decision that you've made in the past? All right. How would that decision be different if you'd been an irrational mind? You can talk about wise mind decisions that have been made in the past and what was going on to get there. So I think that's just an overriding core. These are a couple of things we share literally in orientation, so the young person thinks about them the whole time. We want to set up some scenarios for you to think about today. We're unveiling, this is a new tool we're putting out there. We've developed, and our team is really working on new tools to do this more effectively. And this is one we started, and then we're going to move to Bree in your packet. But this is how some of you may have heard of the, whoops, hold on just a second. Pause that. Joseph Campbell's hero journey. Harry Potter goes through a hero journey in every story, where trials and tribulations, and then they come out a little bit different person. And so we're working to build in that story into young people. And so this is one of the ways we're doing it. In your packets to page, there we go. Bree, we're actually going to read this out loud. So we hit on, multiple different learning styles. You got it in front of you. But we're going to revisit Bree a couple times today as we go through diagnostic criteria and motivational interviewing. So we want you to know Bree's story. And Katie and I talked, this one is actually fairly representative, kind of an amalgamation of what we see and hear about as we learn a young person's story. "Don't leave your bag in the hall," Bree's mom yells. Then, as Bree walked past her mom without saying a word, her mom says, "Don't you ignore me." Bree rushes into her room and slams the door. "Why are you so negative all the time?" her mom yells through the door. "This is the best time of your life. Just wait until you grow up. It's not going to get any easier." "I can't stand it anymore," Bree thinks. "Nobody gets me. Nobody likes me." Bree sits on her bed with her precious possessions surrounding her, her journal on her desk, her art posters, and her yellow laptop and cell phone. Other things are hidden behind the secret door cut into the ceiling of her closet: a bottle of wine, some pot, and her cutting implements. Bree thinks about how stupid her parents are for not knowing that she steals their wine. Then she thinks over her day. I've been going to the same stupid school for 4 years, and today was the worst day ever. It was so boring. I felt like cutting myself just to block out the boredom. My friends talked about the usual stuff, boys and moronic boy bands. My teachers talked in boring voices about boring stuff. Mr. Woods made us copy paragraph after paragraph from his PowerPoint slides. Ms. Campbell showed a 52-minute video that was at least 30 years old. Mr. Wilson told me to grow up because I was drawing instead of paying attention to his stupid class. I can't stand it anymore. None of them understand me. None of them care about what I want, what I feel, and what I think. Then Bree picks up her notebook and starts writing. My pain is alive. My soul aches. Nothing helps. I have nowhere to go. I've tried everything to control my feelings, but nothing works. If I lose control, I might actually go too far. That scares me and makes my heart hurt too. So I'm going to keep cutting deeper and deeper. I can't stand it. I don't intend to kill myself. At least I don't think I do. Bree throws her journal across the room. Then almost automatically, she extracts the blade from her secret place, sits down on her bed, and slowly cuts her upper thigh. The cutting feels otherworldly, like someone else is doing it. She watches as the blood runs down her legs. She had felt like screaming at her mom just a few seconds ago, but now she feels nothing. Anybody really quick, what shows up for you when you hear that scenario? Pain? What are you thinking about when you start interacting with her? I'm gonna be nice right now, but eventually I will stay silent until somebody speaks.
About isolation.
We're gonna keep working with you on how you would conceptualize, how would you ideally act towards her. Anybody have any immediate ideas on where you would start? Validation? Yeah, it's tough. We've actually spent a lot of energy trying to think about where we start with these young people, to the point of keep moving that process back so that every piece of our interaction with a family or a young person is reinforcing the tools we're doing. But this is, I'm going to walk you through how we would start with, and hopefully it gives you some ideas. You guys would turn to page 1 in your packets. Want to play the game of life. Down there, 2/3 of the way down the page. I would like everyone to write, hopefully you have a Renew pen near you, 4 numbers between 1 and 63. And it's not that big a deal. You can pick any numbers you want. You're just picking the fate of the rest of your life. All right? Just be clear. All right, so it shouldn't take you very long. Pick 4 numbers real quick. Those of you at home, I hope you're being honest and doing the activity. It's funner if you do it. Oh. All right. Remember your 4 numbers. We'll get some pens in here too, everybody. Make sure we have them around. All right. Take your 4 numbers. I'm going to throw the Game of Life board on the screen, I think. Yes. You would match up your 4 numbers and kind of jot down a note to yourself what fate has handed you. So match your numbers. So if you wrote 36, you will be stealing in your life. If you can't read them, holler a number out and I will tell you what it says. Okay.
Mainly, this is about what it does with families too, all right? Do I have somebody that would tell me what life handed them? What did fate hand me? Yeah.
Okay, so I am going to be creative,
Creative,
and I'm going to be angry,
angry,
so I'll get expelled,
all right,
and I'm gonna go on a bitch.
okay. Is that a life you want to live?
Out of the four.
2 out of the 4. So you want to live half your life.
To be creative, the adventure, I like to stay in the
You could be like a Picasso, an angry creator, kind of thing, right? Somebody else want to share? Yeah, right here.
So if you're gonna be angry, you may as well get good at it, right? Is that a life you want to live? Oh,
If it happens to be shopping and I can afford it, right? Okay, fair enough. One more. Oh, yeah, right back there.
Okay, I graduated high school, and I'm a criminal, and embezzle money, and
Oh, at least it's a coherent story. Yeah, is that a life you want to live? Just really quick, how many of you did fate hand a life you wanted to live? All right, how many of you got handed a life you didn't want to live? Yeah, all right, this is the majority. And we kind of bring this up to start talking about what are the things fate actually has handed you. You know, in my case, fate has handed me, I've been wearing these since I was like 4. Apparently couldn't see well enough at that age that they knew I needed glasses, right? I was short my whole childhood. I would have never picked that. But there are lots of things, you know, anxiety, depression, ADHD. There's lots of things that in our parents, whatever, get handed to us. And so we start that process of what has fate handed you. We show this video. You can find it on YouTube, but I think it encompasses what our goal is. So from right at the start, we try to help a young person think about where they want to end up in their life. All right.
When I was younger, I had this feeling that there was this handbook that I'd never gotten that explained how to be, how to laugh, what to wear, how to stand by yourself in a hallway. Everyone else looked so natural, like they'd all practiced together and knew exactly what to do, even just the way that they'd push the hair out of their face. My experience was pretty much the opposite. I was conscious of how I sat, how I smiled, and when I was alone with another person, I had no idea what to do or what to say. I could just feel myself panic. It sucked. I'd imagine what people were like when I wasn't around, how they'd compare notes on how I didn't quite fit, or even worse, maybe they just wouldn't notice. So I tried to pick up the patterns. I wore what they wore and said what they said. I even wrote "smile more" on a sticky note. And over time, it sort of worked in a way. I made a version of me that fit in, whatever that means. But as I grew older, the patterns kept changing, and it took so much effort to keep learning them. And I was still stuck with the problem that I'd started with, being terrified of the moment when my tricks stopped working. I think it took me too long to learn something, that even though there is a thing called fitting in, that it's something that you can learn and practice. Those pages are so thin compared to who you are, that the way to become natural, like I wanted to be so badly, is by forgetting what you're trying to be to other people. And if there is a handbook, you probably get to write it yourself.
Like whatever's going on with them, can they become where they feel natural in situations and things like that? We have the opportunity, and I think it could be done independently, but we tell them like this is, we give you a handbook when you come in. I think you could give tools, you know, from day one, sharing those kind of things. But we set that up, and I will just tell you, when you find things like this where adolescents are like silent watching it, and granted it's a little bit of an awkward room with different families they've never met, but they really pay attention to this and watch this. And so this time, I'd like you to look and change that from game of life to a story of life for your second, and pick 4 that actually would add up to a life that you would like to lead. appreciate some of you are doing a very diligent job right here. But one of the things I tend to point out is that it usually takes longer, like to figure out what you actually want to choose. One, you have to know all the options. So you actually have to read a lot of them instead of just fate handing you things, and then you have to pick from those and kind of narrow it down. Do I have one or two that wouldn't mind sharing what they chose for their life? We have two hands at that table, so we'll go with it.
I said travel, love others, have fun, be happy.
Excellent. That sounds like a great life. Well, same table.
I did learn, be honest, persist, and experience beauty.
Learn, persist, be honest, and experience beauty. Sounds great. So when I'm doing this with families, I only have the young people at this point. I make everybody share the first half because I'm always looking for somebody to get deported. That's always entertaining to me. But in this case, just the young people. And how we talk about it is that we use this DNAV model, which is acceptance commitment therapy, or ACT, reimagined for adolescents. And so DNAV stands for discoverer, noticer, advisor, and valuer. And so the valuer is finding things that matter to you. All right. And so in a small way, we're already, and I point this out to the young people, we're figuring out things that matter to you. All right. These are things that matter to you and your life. And what we want to do in the program, or what we want to do in our interaction, is to help you move towards those things and figure out what you need, what skills and what tools you need. Because having things that matter to you, the valuer influences behavioral regulation. All right. So a young person who doesn't have anything that matters, or very few things that matter to them, they're very impulsive. They're blurting, they're spending money. There's lots of different risky kind of behaviors, aggressive. And this is also, if nothing matters, including themselves, this is where suicidal and non-suicidal self-injurious behaviors come into play when they don't have things that matter to them. But as they figure out and they build an identity based on values or things that matter to them, they can start regulating their thoughts and behaviors. They can take action. And if you have something that is really important to you, that is motivated. All right. I know there are a lot of parents that bring their young person in saying they have no motivation whatsoever. And at that point, we've got to find something that matters to this kid so they have some motivation to move forward. And right now, I want you guys to do an activity. I put a deck of cards, and so this is one of the ways we do this. I'm going to give you 3 minutes and kind of take the cards, and these are values, and I'm not going to say this is like a comprehensive list of every possible value, but it's a good list, and it gives you some examples, and take 3 minutes to sort them into 3 piles. Doesn't matter much right now, matters some right now, matters most right now. So just three different piles. Give you a couple minutes to do that. Those of you online, if you go to the electronic only packet, the first 2 sheets should be a list of the values that we use. And you can do the same thing and check the boxes, or at least look through them. I'll follow verbally up with the people that are online. We will get the CEU test fixed and working for you. Google has some protections that I don't always know how to navigate. And now do my best Vanna impression.
Can you get like a little closer? Yeah.
There's like 30 more. All right, that was 3 minutes. You know, when we do this in group, it has lots of purposes. We revisit value probably every week during the program, but at some point we're trying to help them pick a couple of those to build ladders to moving towards. And literally every day, one of the goals we ask them to set is, thinking about my value, what is an action I can take to move myself towards that? How can I strengthen the value that's inside of me? And so we come back to that on a regular basis. In my own, like when I'm working with families and I'm working with young people individually, I love having these cards because we can then have a meaningful conversation. It's almost like getting to drive in a car with a kid because that's the best place to do therapy if you ever get a chance. When they're not looking you in the eye, they will share all kinds of stuff. But the cards allow for a little bit of that detachment and they're making meaningful decisions. And then you get to talk about what that means to them and how that looks in their life. And over time, we're building towards what is value consistent behaviors that you can have. The adult program also does it, and they have them keep breaking them down into different categories. So some of you might have gotten both instruction cards. And so you can use these with your adult clients and your adolescent clients. I do this with families where every member in the family, if I'm doing family therapy, this is right at the beginning where we end up everybody picks their most important family values, kind of do a factor analysis until we can get it down to 3 that the whole family agrees on. Then we can set some goals as to what we're going to do in family therapy. How are we going to move towards this? What's getting in the way of that kind of thing? And so I really like this start. I like this coming from ACT and from DNAV. So I can remember early on in my career, I'm like, man, I got to give something for these people, these young people to move towards. And that these models actually have values set in them. And they're not like, I tell the kid, I'm like, I can't hand you values. I can't make that decision for you. You have to pick your things that have meaning to you, just to keep it there. In your online or your electronic only packet, you've got the list of the values. We do an activity with the young person. Music is very, very important to them. And so we actually take these values and say, and they come in 4 domains. And you guys, we've given you that list too in your packet on the back of the cover of your packet. We've split them into domains. Valued living, valuing relationships, valuing myself, and valuing in the presence of difficulty. And so the Vitality playlist is this exercise where we actually pick 3 or 4 values in each one of those domains, come up with a song that reminds you of that value. We ask them to write out why, so you'll see that in the electronic only pack, and then actually create a playlist so that they have a list of music that reminds them of things that matter to them. All right. First time we did this for a while, I put a bunch of these songs into some playlists and then I listened to some of them. So the first time I ever heard K-pop was after doing this exercise. All right. It turns out, original K-pop is all in Korean.
I couldn't understand a single word. The young person couldn't understand a single word of it, but they had a good reason why that song reminded them of that value in their life. So it's really interesting. And again, it's not me pushing any values on them. It's them picking them and moving forward. We've also put in that electronic only packet. Somebody immediately, like we said, well, how do we start with Bree? Oh, we started validation. All right. And we get the opportunity to ask young people what feels validating, what feels invalidating. And in that electronics packet, we've given you a list of both of those that young people over time have shared with us. And I will just say that every single time we do that with the families, they're like, well, that seemed to be validating when they were younger, and I'm still doing it. But as young people change, it gets harder and harder to validate. I just think about my kids. Super easy to validate my 4-year-old that's running around. She's out there now, or she's gone. All right. Well, she's super easy to validate. With a hug and an I love you, she feels good about herself, right? It gets progressively harder as they get older. So I think about with my daughter, she now reads very complicated, or my 11-year-old, she reads very complicated books, and she's writing complicated relational stories in her head. And so she's telling me about these in the car. I don't know any of these characters. I've not read these books. And to validate her, I actually have to pay attention to those names and have a meaningful statement to say after she shared all this. I can't just nod my head and say yes. All right. So it gets harder. And you got to figure out ways to validate, especially adolescents. All right. So there's value experiences in the electronic only packet, pages 1 to 6. But that's the V in DNAB, and it's really where everything starts. All right. Turning back to page 1. So we shift from that. The A in DNAB stands for advisor. Advisor is kind of that inner voice we all have in our heads. And so right now I want to do an experiment. I'm going to set a timer for a minute, and I just want us to sit here in silence. And I want you to do one of two things. I want you to notice the thoughts that come up into your head. And if you want to write those down, you're welcome to. Or if you just want to put a check mark next to, each time you have a different thought, that's fine also. I'm not going to ask anybody to share these. But I do want you to notice those thoughts. All right. So this is the advisor. I'm going to set a timer. And sitting in quiet, just write down your thoughts or check mark. And just noticing your thoughts is a meaningful skill. On your mark, get set, go. I'd finish up that last thought. One of the reasons we do this experiment is to be able to highlight the evidence that says we can't control the thoughts that pop into our head. Our advisor is attached to our amygdala, our fight or flight, stuff like that. I had the opportunity to do the same exercise with over a couple of days with 800 middle schoolers in a gym. My favorite answer, and they actually were quiet for the minute. I was pretty much in awe. And I asked somebody you want to share one of the things you're thinking about? And this young man jumped up and he's like, Lyme. I really didn't get to go into it. I'm like, it's flavor, color, disease. Like, what is this kid thinking about? In a gymnasium or school. But that's what it popped up to his head. All right. We do this experiment in the group also, and it's something you can do with a young person. We probably do it for 2 minutes in group instead of just one. But again, silence, they're in their own heads. We had a young lady came to us really pretty severe depression. So she was flat or down almost all the time. The day we did this, she came in a really good mood. I just want to highlight that she came in that day in a really good mood and started this. So her first 3 thoughts were, I like to go shopping. If I'm shopping, I like the Disney store. And that reminds me of the great family vacation my family took to Disneyland. Those were her first 3 thoughts. Again, we did this for 2 minutes in silence in her own head. Her last 3 thoughts were, I don't fit in anywhere. No one loves me. Everyone would be better off if I were dead. So literally in her own head, in the span of 2 minutes, she went from Disneyland to death. You want to wonder why these young people don't really want to go to sleep in quiet at night. These are some of the things that come up as they try to settle their own mind. They just come up into their own minds. And so that's the advisor. And if you can't learn to unhook or manage it, you're going to become unskilled in cognitive regulation. And that's non-dialectical thinking. So that's black and white thinking. That's poor perspective taking, poor conflict resolution, difficulty influencing others and your own behaviors. All right. The neat thing is if you can learn to unhook from this, if you can learn to manage that inner voice, it really impacts executive functioning. All right. So your ability to plan, strategize, and implement complex tasks is really heightened as you control and are able to manage this advisor voice. You know, and it's got some upsides. So it's not like we can just say, hey, just ignore that inner voice at all times. All right. It's got some upside. Where's my phone's in my pocket. I literally, in my lifetime, could not mine or build or learn all the pieces it would take to build a phone. All right. But because we as a civilization, as people, are able to pass on information and learn things, we can evolve a little bit faster. Promotes fast and efficient functioning. I know what I'm supposed to do when I come in here. Provides helpful rules. Helpful rules are like, you guys all appear to understand that even though we're in a crowd, that we're not really supposed to be yelling up, jumping up and yelling, right? On the other hand, my wife took me to the Steelers-Chiefs playoff game last year, and that's a place where you could just jump up and yell no matter what, right? Those are the kind of rules that the advisor helps us with. I want to share an image. Had a young lady, and I would argue she had control of her advisor at this point, but this is how she would describe what was going on in her head. And she actually drew it at the amount of her brain it took up, is how she thought about it. So school, friends, family was still a big chunk. Work was shoved in the middle there. Third wheeling. She always felt like she was hanging out with couples. The future was huge. Again, this is a high schooler. You got movies, you got books, you got nostalgia. So that's it was a really creative way for them to think about their head. And this was somebody whose advisor was under control. But that advisor has, lots and lots of downsides. All right. It can lead to rigid rule following. Obviously the extreme of that might be OCD and having to tap something 3 times or somebody's going to get hurt. But it can also come across in lesser rules, but that you feel compelled to do. So we had a young person come through the program last spring, and his rule in his head was, I have to try my hardest on everything I do. It actually sounds like a decent rule if you live it, but this is one of those you take to the extreme. It's a young man, very good at chemistry and math, incredible student, not your athlete, all right? But he still had gym class, and he was still told he had to run a mile, and he still had this rule in his head. So he then ran that mile at the hardest pace he possibly could handle. All right. By the way, there wasn't any permanent damage, but you can kind of, like, he was done for that day. He'd used everything he had. He should have, a better rule would let me do my best. That's healthy kind of thing. And so we worked with that young person to figure out what the rules in his head that were driving him and help him. How do we shift that rule? It absorbs others' unhelpful ideas. All right. So I'm numb. I can't feel anything. And I just heard, or even saw on the internet that somebody was cutting and that helped pain go away, or they were vaping. And so you just pick up those rules really easily. it can become, your advisor can become decontextualized. So this is a young person either living in complete fantasy in their head, they're just making up all kinds of situations, or they're falling into dissociation and just checking out. And then it can distort incoming information. And so with this young lady that I just shared her example, it had gotten to the point where that advisor was so self-abusing that it was distorting every possible piece of information that came into her head. And so again, we also ask the young people to draw their advisors, and art is always a good way with a lot of these young people. And I just love, this is how they saw their advisor and how they thought about them. But if you just look at that swirl of blackness that leads into bad person, ignorant, dumb, weird, nasty, evil, smelly, outcast, silent, weird, nobody likes you. This is just all swirling in their head. And it's not like there aren't a couple of positives. Worth it, you're amazing, but they're at the fringes and they're out there and they're not circling very much. In the case of this image, we didn't ask for them to present what we'd see on the outside, but they went ahead and added that. So that young person would be like, I'm fine, if you asked them what was going on. Again, we go back to what you see is not always what you get with a young person. I thought they did a really good job of visually capturing an unmanaged advisor. We also asked the young people to write letters to their advisor. Just to put this one, this was a cute 8th grade girl who honestly had never cussed in group in any way, shape, or form. That was not part of her normal, but this is what was going on in her head. Dear advisor, you're never necessarily helpful to me. One moment you're telling me I'm wonderful, and the next you're calling me ugly and effing worthless and unlovable. You tell me that no one wants to be around me, and you make me insecure. I effing hate you. You're ruining my life, making me choose to make decisions and ruin good relationships. Throughout my whole life, you tricked me into thinking I'm loved, cared for, and worth being here, just to stab me in the back and tear me down piece by piece. You love to tell me how effing sensitive, dingy, and annoying I am, and how much of a bother I am to anyone and everyone. You need to effing shut the hell up and change your attitude. Be more caring and stop making me feel like a piece of shit. Tell me I'm beautiful and unique and important, smart and kind, without turning around and saying the opposite. Make me feel loved. I think I have like 300 of these letters now. This is not an extreme letter. I did not pick an extreme letter. This is kind of middle. This is what we see every week. So not every week, but every time we do this, we get letters like this from every young person. So this is, kind of what's going on in their heads. And as I come back to that, how does that advisor distort? And I think about it as a filter now. It's a filter that no matter what you say, compliments, caring, how are they interpreted by the young person? So, and again, we all have filters. Yes, I'm sorry.
Do you have them share that with their parents?
Those letters?
Yeah.
90% of them let us go ahead and read them out loud to the parents. We don't put names to them. And yeah, it's very, very powerful. Half those times parents are in tears because they kind of figure out which one's their kid. So you take this though, and we end up with different kinds. We all have filters. Some of us have, a progressive filter or a conservative filter. Some of us, when we're younger, had a bulletproof filter. But there, a young person struggling with anxiety has a filter. Struggling with depression has a filter. Any gender questioning, that is a filter that influences everything that comes into them. And this list at the bottom, I had a chance 5 years ago, actually, to talk with all the social work team at Children's Mercy. At the time, they were doing 1,800 adolescent suicide screenings a year, all right? And that means other people were sending them there for a screen. And they told me that they felt that of those 1,800, 90 to 95% of why they had suicidal ideation would fit into one of these 5 categories. They had lack of meaningful connections in their life. They were struggling with an anxiety, depression, or eating disorder. There were gender questions, significant family conflict, or they were dealing with purpose life, existential questions, like what's the purpose of this? All right. So if I run into a young person and I find out, and since we get to do intake documents and stuff, if they're struggling with any one of those,
that's like a yellow flag to me. I'm going to very much pay attention to this young person. If I find out they're struggling with 2 or more of this list of 5, I just assume there's some suicidal ideation going on. That at times in their lives, they're thinking everyone would be better off without me. All right. So I want to kind of demo how I think about this. That's just a normal young person. And that's their brain. There's 150,000 things going on all the time. But that's just a normal young person. All right. Let's imagine that this is our hope, maybe even their own hope for themselves, that they're going to grow from wherever they are to this lion, this presence in the community kind of thing. All right. It's their normal brain. They can see that. They can visualize the future. All right. That's all right. Well, then you add in life. All right. They got to go to school. They're in activities. That complicates it a little bit, but you can still, have hope that the future is going to be better in that case. Well, let's start imagining that this advisor starts becoming self-abusive. All right. And it puts a filter right on top of whatever they can see into the future. It is really hard to know and to even think that there's anything once you kind of get that filter dark and hopeless and despair. Had to try and explain this to a family that really felt like they'd done a good job, had provided everything a young person, and this young lady was still loathed herself. And so we started with there's almost always a biological component, even if that was stimulated by a traumatic event or PTSD or something. There's some kind of biological place that they start from. So that filter's there. Somebody doesn't talk to them or rejects them, becomes discouragement. And this is not bullying. This is literally getting picked third on the team. Or kids are over there playing and they don't even know you want to play with them, but you feel rejected because they didn't invite you into that situation. All right. That's the kind of rejection we're talking about here. All right. Becomes discouragement. All right. That gets picked up and becomes the I don't fit in thought, repeated by the advisor voice. If I don't fit in, becomes something must be wrong with me. And again, that gets repeated over and over by the advisor voice, becomes something is wrong with me. All right. And I differentiate these two. So if you see a young person who is like, man, if I just get the right Crocs and I can put those little doohickeys in them, I'll fit in somewhere. Or, if you'll let me change to a different dance team, I'll fit in on that dance team. Or maybe they're asking to go to a different school. All right. And eventually they've tried all these different areas because, we usually try to navigate that. And it's in their own head that they don't fit in. All right. So they don't fit in here. They don't fit in there. They don't feel like they fit in anywhere. What logical conclusion can they come up with? All right. Something is wrong with me. That gets repeated. And I would say repeated over years in many of the young people we see. So something is wrong with me becomes, I've never really seen this just go in like the positive, like I'm awesome kind of mode. It goes to becomes I'm a bad person. If I'm a bad person, then I can't be loved, cared for. If I can't be loved, I'm not worthy and I have no value. I may as well end everyone's pain by not being alive. I'll tell you, I've read that to a couple hundred young people and yet to have one argue with me that they couldn't see their brain moving in those directions. So when I think about a young person, especially the ones we deal with, I think that we're dealing with two things in treatment. So we're dealing with the coping. We are teaching coping skills, breathing skills, all kinds of that stuff, because they actually have symptoms. They are nervous walking into a door. All right. They are depressed. They are having out of control thoughts. And so we need to help them deal with those symptoms. But we all have to cope with what we think about ourselves. All right. And so what we think about ourselves influences every domain of our life. That makes sense to everybody? Because think about yourself. Like, all right, I'm on a good day. I'm feeling good about myself. Incredibly enough, all my therapy sessions went awesome today. And then the next day you're in a fight with your spouse, you've had a bad experience, and like you did exactly the same thing, maybe even said the same words, and you don't feel the same about how they ended up. So I would argue, and we actually do this with some filters in the room, that
it doesn't matter how much compassion, compliments, love you're trying to pour into a kid. If their filter has already become self-abusing and beating themselves up, all they're going to interpret that is in hate. We threw a couple of other poems into the packet of young people just describing how they saw their own pain, kind of thing. So we just put those out there. Again, we have 300 of these letters, and I'm working really hard we've got them all in computer so we can compile them, but I'm trying to put together some kind of way to share that more, because I think it's powerful. It's very powerful to parents as they start like, oh, that makes sense why they won't accept a compliment. And I've had a dad just flat out say she doesn't accept any compliments. And another person, we actually worked on a ladder of what is the smallest level of compliment you could take. All right, so if you put some nice things on a sticker on the refrigerator, I could handle walking by that. And then wrote that letter about how that young person could start accepting compliments. All right, one more experiment here. I'm going to throw a poem up on the screen, and I want you to read it to yourself without moving your lips and see if you can do what it says. I can assume most of you are good readers. I would actually like a show of hands if you could hear your own thoughts, if you could listen to yourself. Give me a show of hands. All right. Who could make it really, really loud inside your head? Who could make it whisper inside your head? Who's willing to do their crotchety old man voice? You guys are good. Usually I can catch a parent, and then I get somebody. Again, half of this is for my own entertainment. If you can do any one of those four things, and I think this stimulates some hope in young people, but if you can do any one of those four things, you can learn to unhook from that advisor, that inner voice. And you can, and it's called an advisor for a couple of reasons, but one is that accepting it's just a piece of advice. Maybe it's good advice in this situation, but in other times it might not be, and you want to listen to your values. And so we're already pulling this back to, yeah, your advisor is saying it is scary to walk through that door in the math class, all right? But your values, what do your values say? Your values say, I want to graduate. I want to go to college. All right, am I going to listen to my values, or am I going to listen to my advisor in that situation? We're actually very much on time. So I'm going to say, are there any questions on anything I've thrown out so far? Anything in the chat I need to respond to? Yeah.
Do you read that poem to adolescents and illustrate to them that this is kind of because it allows you to disconnect from the advisor?
Yes.
Tell me, will you make that connection one more time? I'm like right there almost, but like,
Okay. If you can notice your own thought.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, yes. All right. She has asked let me try to reconnect why anything in this poem has to do with the ability to unhook from the advisor. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
It's harsh, but I'm like,
Yep.
I made some connection, it's not as clear as.
So again, this is where we're not on day one, but we're going to shift into mindfulness and what is your ability to notice your own thoughts. So if you can notice your own thoughts, which is hearing that voice, if you can then actually manage and make it softer, or manage and make it louder, or say it in a silly voice or a different voice, you're immediately practicing diffusion techniques on thoughts that are in your own head. So now if you can figure out how to then unhook, which is just, if it's just a voice in my head, if it's a crotchety old man, I'm not going to listen to it, because guess what? I don't listen to half the people that talk to me, right? You can use that example with a young person. But if they can do any one of those, the goal is to just they all get the advice. I mean, like every one of them, like, yeah, I got that voice.
but it's been there for as long as I can remember, and I believe it is who I am. All right, so that young lady that I talked about, she literally thought she was telling herself that the world would be better off without her. So she was being very strong not to have given into that all the time until she learned to unhook and just accept that it was a piece of advice. So does that answer the question? It's a great question.
Thank you.
The kids, they typically get that. And I break it down to just one because some of them can't do all of it to begin with. But I can't remember a young person who didn't raise their hand on any of them. Yeah. Any other questions in the room? Yeah.
Earlier, you were talking about how COVID is like working against girls a little bit.
Mhm.
I'm curious because you guys serve as adolescents. When are we going to open it up to maybe 6 and up? Because in the elementary setting, as a result of COVID, we're seeing all these behaviors that you listed at the beginning in very little kids because rules are constantly changed on them in the school environment. One year it looks like this, one year, like our kindergartners are not even able to socialize in classroom as we would see it in the past years because there are those COVID toddlers, but we're seeing school avoidance, we're seeing OCD, we're seeing these extreme amounts of pandas being diagnosed based on
Yeah.
behaviors occurring, based on anxieties. The space for these little ones.
Yeah, I feel you. At some point, you're out of my comfort zone. I don't.
Well, it might change.
I've hung out with teenagers my whole life, which most people are like kind of afraid of. I, on the other hand, have been afraid of nursing homes. I love to play with little kids. I'm reading that literature. I went and did a talk in an elementary school this summer. And in that case, what I did with those parents, because they were saying some of the same things in their elementary school, we gave them a set of conversation cards. So it's the values in question form to have that conversation. To even, and it doesn't matter how young, but what matters to you? What does a good life look like? So having those meaningful conversations. I will say on a very concrete, what am I attempting to do with this? I'm going to walk my own 11-year-old, almost 12-year-old through all like 20 of our lessons, and I'm going to videotape it and try and have that be available to parents of younger children about like how you might teach this or go through some of this. But that's a longer term project as I try to move some of our stuff into an online format for different scenarios such as that. But I would love to see somebody who just loves little kids figure, I refer to
Yeah.
PCIT. I think some of that parent training is probably what's really necessary and help them figure out how to have their interactions on an everyday basis with that young person.
It's PCIT is very much a very robotic
Yes.
intervention. And we're Children's Mercy contracting with the Valley School District. So, but we're just seeing with this affluent kind of privileged and title environment that most of our kids were probably on screens quite a bit. And so recreating boredom and things. I was just curious if there was.
I don't think it has to be robotic all the time. I mean, it's got some good friends. We just walked through it with both of our young kids.
I did it with my daughter too.
And we learned some stuff. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, I get that. So
So I'm trained in play therapy, and honestly, when the pandemic hit, I had a baby 3 weeks before literally everything shut down. And when I came back from maternity leave, I couldn't do it anymore. Like, it was too triggering for me. So I kind of stepped away from that. But the background I come in with when I think of the 6-year-olds, especially, you guys are seeing the behaviors a lot sooner than we are. I mean, we're getting high schoolers and middle schoolers who socially have just had cell phones and Snapchat and their faces for a while. But the younger ones are all like metaphorical play. And I think that's where it becomes a challenge with like these concrete skills. You would have to figure out a different way to present them. Not saying that it couldn't potentially be an option, But it would just take a lot more thinking that we, at our level, haven't thought of yet.
No, I use the cards in elementary school. Yeah, and they work really well. I pare them down, but yeah.
Mhm.
And then they draw, and then we do a lot of play-based to like 1 dimension, 2 dimension, 3 dimension aspects of what their feelings are. And so they can walk through that and see them through all different things. But I was just curious if you guys were ever gonna open up for.
On the other hand, I would be willing to mentor and support and help. It's just not, I haven't spent the hours that I've spent with adolescents. So my filter is not, I don't feel confident enough in my filter to work with a 7 or 8-year-old. But I might be able to help somebody who has spent those hours in that time. I had a question, Yellow.
Well, you kind of just touched on it. I just think I too look at elementary school and middle school, but a couple things went through my mind when she was talking. One is parental involvement. At that age, it is so crucial to have parallel kind of interventions. A lot of times what I'm experiencing is parents want this to happen because, well, I'm busy in the evening and all these services are further out than what, and so that's, I think, just the difficulty in our job. Secondly, I just was wondering, I work with a lot of kids that have some cognitive issues. And so do you ever experience some of that? Because a lot of this is very executive function, higher level thinking. Do you work with any kids that have some deficits in that cognitive area?
We hit the high end of autism on a regular basis. We do a lot of this very experientially, so it allows us to reach, I say, a wider than just the cognitive stuff. And the first thing that comes to mind, we just had a young person and we told them, like, when they were reiterating and doing these things at home simultaneously, because one time in group was not enough in that case, even though they were a high schooler. So there has to be just integration with the family in those cases. As a team, we've done a pretty good job in the room, but if we can transfer the information to the parents, we have bigger impact. I do want to add, one of the things I shared with the parents is not just the conversation cards, but as a family, picking 3 or 4 values that they literally were going to live out and talk about and show young people value consistent behaviors in their family moving forward, so the young person actually understood what that would mean maybe in their own life. All right, with that, I'm going to say 10-minute break. I'm going to hit a timer. Katie is going to be on next with DSM updates, criteria, and motivational interviewing.